I first came across Richard Feynman from his 1964 lecture at Cornell University. I wasn't there obviously, it was just a random YouTube video I happened to click on. I'd heard his name before and I had some vague idea that he did something interesting in physics, but I'd never actually seen him give a lecture, and we were never taught about him in school. What surprised me was how easily he condensed the idea of the scientific method into an engaging and thought-provoking lecture.
The key part of what Feynman said was, it doesn't matter how beautiful your theory is, it doesn't matter how smart you are, if it doesn't agree with experiment, it's wrong. And really, this is the scientific method. That is why science gives us our best chance of understanding the universe. It's the inextricable link between theory and empirical evidence that gives any of it meaning. This is all well and good, but I think a couple of examples of scientists doing this properly will bring the idea to life.
In 1998, two teams were simultaneously working to find the rate of expansion of the universe. Specifically, they were trying to find the rate at which the expansion was decelerating. This assumption made sense at the time, because surely, if the universe had been expanding since the time of the Big Bang, then the rate of expansion now should be much less than it was at the time of the Big Bang, right? So, the two teams, one from Berkeley and one from Harvard, were rushing to be the first to find this out. For a discovery as significant as this, a Nobel Prize was definitely on the table.
But here's the thing, what both teams found was that the rate of expansion of the universe was actually speeding up, not slowing down. And what's even more surprising is the reason why, which actually we still don't know. Our best theory is dark energy, which is basically physicists saying, yep, we don't have a clue. Getting back to the point of this example, the reason that we do know, for sure, that the universe is accelerating, is that that's what the empirical evidence tells us. We know it's true, even without having a good theory to explain why it's true.
So that's the scientific method, constantly doubting yourself and trusting the evidence. Feynman applied this throughout his life, leading him to become recognized as one of the greatest physicists of all time. Even at an early age, Feynman was pretty clever. He loved to tinker with electronics. In those days, household items like radios and speakers were relatively simple. They had straightforward circuits that you could see if you took them apart.
So Feynman got pretty good at fixing up broken radios. So good in fact, that people began to hire him to fix their own radios. Remember, he was just a young boy at this point. He later said that the main reason people hired him was because of the Great Depression, and money was tight. But it's still pretty astounding that he was able to think so clearly about a problem at such a young age.
One of the most interesting things about Feynman is that despite being an incredible physicist, he's often better known for the other stuff he did. He was the kind of man who enjoyed playing pranks on his co-workers and colleagues, even while working on the atomic bomb at Los Alamos during World War II. He learned to pick locks from a guy named Leo Lavatelli, and he would constantly use this skill to demonstrate how unsafe the important documents were at Los Alamos.
Whenever Feynman wanted somebody's reports and they weren't around, instead of waiting for them, he'd simply go into their office, open the filing cabinet, and take it out. When he was done, he'd hand it back to them. When filing cabinets with tougher locks were brought in, he eventually figured out how to get past that too.
There's no shortage of stories we could tell about Richard Feynman, but if you watch this channel, you're probably interested in some of his physics. Some of the things he worked on were the superfluidity of liquid helium, the path integral formulation in quantum mechanics, the Parton model in particle physics, and quantum electrodynamics, for which he shared a Nobel Prize in 1965. He's also famous for his Feynman diagrams, which are now used in physics to describe interactions between subatomic particles. He was so fond of them, in fact, that he even painted them on his van.
Most of those things really deserve videos of their own. So for the purpose of this video, we're going to talk about his fascinating contribution to the Challenger investigation in 1986. For those who aren't well versed in NASA history, the Challenger disaster was a definite low point in the American space program. Space Shuttle Challenger was the second space-going orbiter to be used by NASA after Columbia. It first flew in 1983 and made 9 successful flights before, on its 10th mission, it disintegrated just over a minute after launch.
Sadly, all 7 crew members were killed by this failure, which was seen live on television by 17% of the American population, as one of the crew members was civilian Krista McAuliffe, who would have been the first teacher in space. After the disaster, the shuttle fleet was grounded for 32 months and the Rogers Commission was set up. This was a special commission appointed by then-President Ronald Reagan. William Rogers was a former Secretary of State, and his task was basically to find the technical fault, fix it, and show that NASA wasn't responsible for the disaster as quickly as possible. Feynman was asked to be a part of this investigation, which he reluctantly accepted.
What he found was that the disaster had been caused by a failure in the O-rings that were responsible for forming a seal in the structure of the shuttle. They had no resilience at low temperatures, meaning that they couldn't form a tight seal. Famously, he demonstrated this in a televised hearing by dipping one of the O-rings in a cup of ice water. It's important to note that Feynman likely didn't discover this by himself, but was actually unknowingly led to this conclusion by anonymous NASA personnel who were already aware of this issue. Indeed, the Commission found that NASA managers have actually known that O-rings had potential to fail since 1977, 9 years before the disaster, but they had repeatedly disregarded and suppressed warnings from engineers about the temperature problem.
Feynman interviewed managers as part of his investigation, and he found staggering gaps in their technical knowledge, as well as a wide disconnect between NASA's engineers and their executives. While the managers claimed a 1 in 100,000 chance of catastrophic failure, NASA's very own engineers estimated it to be more like 1 in 200. In another example, some early tests showed that the O-rings had burned a third of the way through. NASA managers took this to mean that the O-rings had a safety factor of 3. In engineering, a safety factor of 3 would mean the O-rings had been built to withstand 3 times more force than they would ever be subjected to. And NASA managers made this conclusion because they only burned a third of the way through.
And that's completely wrong. Once the O-rings begin to burn through, they are defective, so they no longer have a safety factor. The correct way to declare a safety factor of 3 would have been if the maximum force was 1/3 of the force required to begin to make the O-rings fail. This was something that Feynman pointed out in his chapter of the report, which ended up being so harshly critical of NASA that Rogers didn't want to include it in the report. Remember, his job was to make NASA appear as blameless as possible. But Feynman was particularly angry that this dodgy science had recruited Krista McAuliffe into the mission, and he threatened not to sign the report if his chapter was removed. So it was left in, but moved to the appendix.
Probably the worst part is that in 2003, it happened again. Space Shuttle Columbia disintegrated on re-entry, killing all 7 crew members on board. After this, space shuttles were grounded for over 2 years, and work on the International Space Station was put on hold. Then, there was one final mission to repair the Hubble Space Telescope, but all other space shuttle missions went to the ISS, so the crew could stay there in case the orbiter was damaged and re-entry was unsafe. In the end, NASA did make organisational changes so that disasters like this never happened again.
Of course, Feynman had his own theory on why things went wrong from a human perspective. He suggested that, based on the success of the Apollo missions to the moon, the managers thought that they could keep pushing the engineers and things would just work out. They didn't care about the technical issues, they just wanted fast results. This was fine during Apollo, where the task at hand wasn't too far beyond current technology. But in Challenger's case, the claims the managers were making were simply impossible for the engineers to fulfill. In Feynman's words, as he concluded in his report, "For a successful technology, reality must take precedence over public relations, for nature cannot be fooled." You can check out the links in the description to find out more. Thanks for watching.